Hi, welcome. Glad you're here. This is Dr. Norm McVeigh speaking, and this is podcast number 3. Glad you're here very much. Hope you're doing well with the material. This podcast series is entitled High-Tech Alchemy, a study in high magic and altered states. The codes that unlock the treasure. The truth is hiding in plain sight. This is copyrighted by iBlissnow, LLC, 2018, all rights reserved. Our website is iBlissnow.com. And we're moving right along here with our material for the day and for the week. And so let's see what we have here. Well, I just want to do a little more intro to myself and how some of this came about. This is going to be really important, this one piece, as we get on with the research here. But I went to Our Lady of Angels Catholic School in Burlingame, California. I know that doesn't sound like, hey, so what? But I got to tell you something. When I wrote Our Lady of Angels, I had always spelled it Our Lady of Angles. And the nuns would go crazy on me. They would really go nuts. And they had me writing on the board Our Lady of Angels, and then slowly that deteriorated back into Our Lady of Angles. Well, I have to blame, my grandfather, step-grandfather, Alan Porter, because he talked to me about angles. And he said that angels were angles. And he was absolutely right. I don't care what kind of a scholar you are or what you've come up with. I've traced this and I've worked on this for so many years. Angels are angles. And this will be extremely important to you in the future because angles are sacred geometry. So there we go. I also want to tell you that I had the pleasure of visiting the Egyptian exhibit in the London Museum in 1968. And also after that, the Vatican Library. That was actually in the early 80s. And I met a Jesuit priest there who we became friends, and he was probably not too much longer to be involved, though the Jesuits are very, very open to all this secret science, so to speak, or alternative science. But he was really on the edge. And he allowed me in the library and sat with me all through the night there while I was working, and then went to bed, and I went home and went to bed, and then we did it again next night. But the Vatican Library was loaded with gilded edge books with all sorts of subjects, from alchemy to all forms of subtle sciences. I mean, just beyond. It's nothing like I've ever seen before. And also within that Vatican Library, there was the Egyptian material there. And also, lo and behold, the material from the radiesthesias, from the French radiesthesias. So anyway, there you go. Now, I also probably mentioned too, my doctorate in psychology is essentially is biofeedback or measurement. So it's in the use of biofeedback instrumentation, psychological testing, and also in therapy. And you may also know me from iBliss, from OxyBliss, which is a compound I put together, an oxygenator that I put together back some 35 years ago, or from my Oxygen Research Institute with the Life Energy Amplifiers. And those are still around a lot. I run into people every day, not every day, but a lot of days that have them and bought them and such. So, and also I mentioned my time in the quantum physics lab. So, okay, moving along here. The secrets of Egyptian temple science, the suppressed and lost story and technology. And this is the essence of the mystery schools. And this is going to be like a really, really interesting screenplay here. So I will mention this here in more depth. I've covered it in the intro, just a little tread so light so on it, but now I want to cover it in some real depth. And so as I mentioned that Napoleon sacked Egypt in 1790 and took with him to King Louis about 1,000 artifacts. And these were kept in a vault underneath the Louvre. Drum roll here, some suspenseful music. And essentially, it wasn't until 1930 that they were pulled out, and the French Academy of Sciences essentially got together their top researchers and the ones that they could trust to experiment and look at these items and conduct tests and measurements to find out what they were and how they worked. and some of them, they were just statues, so called, and just art, just sacred geometry. We didn't know in those days. They didn't know it was sacred geometry, probably, and they were unusual shapes and forms. Something as innocent as a cat sitting on a pedestal, or as a sphinx. Now, there didn't seem to be anything extraordinary about that. That just didn't seem to be anything extraordinary. But Leon Chameray and company, D. Belazar and El Turine and the rest of the group got together and they started work. And they started measurement. And they worked for 5 years before they put out their results in about an inch-thick volume book, along with the recommendation that the research of this never be, and the objects never be taken out of the Louvre, that they have a tremendous power to them that is not understood. And I'll give you an idea about that power. Leon Chameray was one of the scientists that worked on the device, and the device on devices. And one of these devices was a sequence of domes, of half circles, or let's call them spheres, like so-called planets, cut in half, and these were stacked up. So Leon Chameray apparently didn't know what they were, and he dismissed them because there was no electricity plugged into them, and they were very unassuming. He just assumed that, apparently that nothing would happen. Well, he was found dead on his desk the next morning, and he was dehydrated. He was suffering from cellular dehydration. He was mummified. So I feel some sadness in that, because what a brave person to go ahead and research that way, and his life to be cost for that research. But we learned from that the dark side, or the side of a psychotronics weapon, that those devices could be used as. But we also, through the other brave men that did the research, we found out everything, or a lot of things we needed to know. Their effects on medicine, energy healing, energy psychology, altered states, digital pharmacy, all sorts of such. And there's a lot more to this story that has leaked out over the years. And this is essentially the hidden story that so many people who have done research have discovered. These objects are incredible of doing action at a distance. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. And after understanding this, you might not call it spooky. But they were able to find objects and discover objects and measure them producing action at a distance. One of the things that they discovered was, I thought this is an amusing story, is that there were rats in one of the basements of one of the researchers, and they had thrown in some cats to go after the rats. And they said after 3 days, the rats and cats were at a stalemate. Nothing had been accomplished. And the cats were essentially freaked and perhaps outnumbered. So they put an energy field. They took a picture of the basement, and they sent what's called a horizontal energy field. Now, rats run on a vertical field, so they don't like horizontal energy. And I'll go a lot more into this. But they broadcast that energy, that horizontal energy, to the basement. And they said within 12 hours, cats and rats were gone. That was it. So you can start to get the idea of what is possible with this. When they did action at a distance, they found that they could send the energy field from one location to another. Now, some other things that have come up too, that I guess this would be a good point to get into here, and that is that in the Egyptian healing method, what they would do is use something that was later called the universal pendulum by the French radiesthesists. Radiesthesists is essentially those that use devices, pendulums particularly, to measure energy. And what they essentially found is that you could measure a witness, whether that be a fingernail from somebody, from a subject, or whether that be a picture, or whether that be blood, etc. And with that universal pendulum, it measured the 12 frequencies. Remember I told you the 12 frequencies of orgone, or 12 fields of orgone, 12 colors of orgone? Well, you could measure and find out which one of those frequencies, or which frequencies that person was low in. And what you could do is send action at a distance those particular frequencies as a therapy or remedy or healing to the subject. And it would round out their personality. And for people that were, just as a very basic example, for those that were very, let's say they were too kicked back and relaxed, and they, let's say, operated in the blue and indigo fields, you could send them the field of orange or red or yellow and get them out there looking for a job and, going out there and doing some righteous work. And for those that were the overachiever types, and like me, and the types that were wired and maybe had trouble sleeping and were, overly energized, overly amped, you sent them blue and indigo, those are the missing fields, and they would calm down and balance. And so that's just an idea to give you of the technology that existed in Egypt. So we may think of them as some, whatever kind of society with maybe some negative adjectives, but it appears not. So that would be one subject, one aspect of it. The other is that the Great Pyramid of Giza was used as a compass. In other words, it put out 12 frequencies or 12 fields from the top of the apex of the pyramid. And those 12 fields didn't move. They stayed where they were. The red stayed at whatever degrees north, the orange stayed at so many degrees south, etc., etc., etc. So that meant if you were in the desert and got lost, you could take a pendulum out that's an adjustable pendulum that adjusts for color. And that has been, I saw that actually in the London Museum in 1968, and I freaked out. I had no idea what it was. It looked like something my dad used as a plumb bob in building, for some of his projects and such. But you can know where you are by that measurement. You can know what color you're on in the desert, whether you're on red, orange, yellow, indigo, violet, green, etc., and you know where you are in what angularity to that pyramid. It's a pretty cool device. So anyway, that later was called a virtual cone pendulum, which has made its circulation around, and it's a very interesting device as well. And I'll get more into some of that probably too. Okay, so those devices were something that the petroleum industry, medicine, free energy, it's an ultimate weapon. It would change psychology, science, religion. And the French radiesthesists discovered many breakthroughs in terms of working with those particular objects. Now, I should also mention too that, and this is a theory of mine, but I think it plays its way out pretty well. Probably everybody has heard, much to some people's chagrin, about the curse of the pharaohs, that those who violated the tomb were cursed and died from mysterious incidents. This has been, again, through a lot of films. Well, what is the curse of the pharaohs? Well, there's a society called the Imhotep Society, or the Left Eye of Horus Mystery School. Now, both of these, the names have changed through the centuries. But essentially, it's a group of pharaohs, or those that were the guardians of the pharaoh knowledge. And what they did was, how they made the curse happen is they got a blood spot, a napkin from someone, drops from the eyes, food particles from the mouth, blood spot, photograph, etc. as a witness. Remember, we talked about this before. And they used those devices, action at a distance, to send a vertical field to the recipient to make them sick, and essentially is what happened to Leon Chameray would happen to them. So this is weaponizing, in my opinion, healing technology, not something I'd want to do. But I want to mention that because that, in my opinion, is very, very much what that's about. They're very guarded of those pharaonic secrets. and those temple mystery school secrets of going to anyone outside of Egyptians, and particularly those not initiated within the secret societies. And those secret societies guard that information. And that is the mummy's curse. And that may have been very much what happened to Bruce Lee, the martial artist and actor, who might well have been murdered for sharing the secrets of TDK, his martial art that he had been trained in. Essentially, Bruce Lee's sharing of that, yes, to movie stars and such like that, but outside of the Chinese community and outside of those initiated within those secret societies, within the various temples. And each temple had its own style of martial arts. And so Bruce Lee may have met the same fate as Leon Chameray, met the same fate as those that have stolen the artifacts from Egypt. And I don't go along with stealing anybody's artifacts. That's so far below on the bottom of the scale, it's ridiculous. But it is a way they've gotten out into our research. And I think that is extraordinary. And, you know, this is not the first of it. Speaking of Nikola Tesla, he had a car that ran on an antenna that ran from free energy, from ether. And he developed a lot of this, perhaps not at all being aware of the Egyptian mystery schools and the French radiesthesias, but following a completely different line of research. And so it may well be that there are many research lines that lead up to the goals of free energy and altered states and incredible health and vitality and such like that are not particularly part of this. But this particular French radiesthesias are to be credited for the amount of research. They did 40,000 experiments. That's not 400, that's not 4,000, that's 40,000 experiments from 1930 to 1950, 30s to the 50s, or 30s to 1950. That's one hell of a lot of research, and they've come up with a lot. And I've benched this out. I've taken these materials and taken these to physicists over the years, and I came across this material over 20 years ago. And I've taken it to physicists and to various institutions of learning and research. And I've yet to find anybody that doesn't say, oh my God, this is something we never knew anything about. It's pretty much the standard statement, because it's beyond anything that people have ever come into contact with before. As we thought Egypt was basically, a bunch of people, and we have our judgment about them. I won't say what those are, but the Rosicrucians and the and other groups have brought that information and tried to preserve that information. Various secret schools, Masons, etc., have preserved that information. And the Masons were very, very good at building buildings that resonated those particular desirable energies. So that's what they did, laying the cornerstones, doing the angles. Angels are angles, and that's what they did. And they built buildings that could generate altered states of consciousness and generate particular effects that they were desirous of. So I want to mention those there to you. I'm seeing what else we need or want to cover here. Yeah, I think that's about it for this particular podcast. I think this covers it pretty well. And this is the end of podcast 3, and we're going to go on to podcast 4, and we're going to be covering some quite amazing information here. I'm going to start out with ancient man and ancient women, and I'm going to show you how the sciences of astronomy, astrotheology, alchemy, magic, and a number of other sciences have all come out of, and how they've come out and how they've evolved from pre-dawn man, let's say, if that's even a term, but let's say way, way back the ancients, how these particular sciences and results came out and how religions were formed and how technology came into being. So join me there, will you? This is Dr. Norm McVeigh, and looking forward to seeing you next podcast.